Jeriel and her brother's cat, Bacall. She's decided to be my co-star for a little while. And I just wanted to start this off by saying hello, and I miss you, and I love you, and I'm sending you all sorts of good thoughts these days to the both of you. Incidentally, my mom is off screen right now. She's not ready for the camera, but you may hear a cough, you may hear a sneeze throughout the story, and if you do, just imagine it as another character in the story. I think you can see I'm in a disco. I hope that doesn't get annoying. Maybe I'll shut that off. But I thought the features on my brother's camera were kind of fun and might make this a little bit more interesting. So, actually, they might get really annoying. So instead, I'm going to bring you, since you're in California and you're not experiencing this, I just thought I'd go outside and do this in the snow with this cat. Alright, so here goes. This is called A Shadows. Alistair's shadow had a shadow, and so did his shadow's shadow, and so on. When Alistair walked down the street, his shadows would fan out around him so that it seemed like an Alistair Cromley flower, a center of Alistair Cromley surrounded by thin, dark petals of Alistair Cromleys. A man surrounded by himself sounds, from this lofty stance, egotistical. But this was not a choice. Far from, in fact. One day his shadow had a shadow. The next day his shadow's shadow had a shadow, and so on and so forth, until Alistair was encased in shady versions of himself. They were sweet men, his shadows, needing very little. They lacked almost all form of social skill, even with Alistair, to whom it seemed they owed their very existence. But this flaw aside, they had no base for negatives in any way beyond their appearance. Alistair would often offer them whatever he might be eating, knowing full well they would turn it down most politely. He wondered where they received their sustenance, but he rarely lost sleep over it. Each shadow seemed content with whatever means it survived on. Though nothing was said, Alistair remained in the sun as much as he possibly could. The shadows, it seemed, put all matters of faith in Alistair, and Alistair put his in the sun. Alistair felt as though they were equal parts sun and equal parts him, and in that way Alistair became the sun, with rays of Alistair's beaming from him, the core. This was the equation Alistair accepted, one in which it was just decided that the formula makes sense, like the ability to add numbers together and get zero. People often asked him how he obtained the extras, and Alistair shrugged his shoulders and always said, "Your guess is as good as mine." Initially he thought perhaps his shadow had gotten lonely, but why all the extras? Could he have been that lonely? It was in times like these that Alistair wished he could talk with his silhouettes. Alistair sunk into a minor depression, walking along feeling completely alone even while surrounded by an army of Alistairs. Alistair felt like an outcast because although he knew the shadows had nothing to say to each other, it was obvious they enjoyed each other's company. Alistair was unsure if they felt the same about him. They'd had definite respect for him, this he knew, but whether or not they considered him a friend, Alistair could not say. One day Alistair walked into Mr. Aggie's general store. Mr. Aggie was a kindly old man whose wrinkles came from a lifetime of smiling. He was a short man, although you could not be certain if he was always short or whether old age had brought a shorter stature along with the wrinkles. Alistair purchased a box of saltines. Mr. Aggie took his money, gave Alistair change, put the saltines in a paper bag, and handed the bag to Alistair, to which Alistair said, "Thank you." Mr. Aggie said, "Right." This was how he always responded to thank yous. "Right," as if he were a kindly old etiquette teacher, tutoring everyone on the proper use of polite phrases. Alistair noticed Mr. Aggie's shadow seemed faded. He normally did not take any notice, but that day he could see a difference. Mr. Aggie seemed unaware, so Alistair decided not to worry him. He headed out the door and into the sunlight, looking down only once, and noticing that one of Alistair's petals had fallen off. He looked around to see where he could find it, and saw through the front window of the general store his shadow mingling with Mr. Aggie's shadow. The old man's shadow gaining back its color, and Alistair's former shadow taking on a new Mr. Moore Aggie shape. This was how it went, until, one by one, all but two of Alistair's shadows left him and found lonely shadows, needing company. Alistair felt 2 was the perfect amount for him. He felt comfortable again. This was also how Alistair acquired the moniker of Shadow Giver. Though he always diverted credit to his first shadow, saying all accolades rightfully belonged to him, for it was his silhouette and not Alistair that started it all. So there you go. Sorry about Mr. Agee and Mr. Agee. They are the same person. I just realized I said 2 different names. And that is that. But before I go, I just want to say goodbye as werewolf. Goodbye. It was good talking to you.
I'm sending y'all my good vibes in a weird accent now, and
it was really, really nice to talk to you. And I send you all healing vibes.